There is a version of you that could sit in silence for an hour and feel completely fine. Not bored, not restless, fine. That version of you existed before something fundamental shifted, not in the world, but in the chemistry of your own brain. Something has been quietly recalibrated. The threshold for what counts as interesting has been raised so far that ordinary reality no longer clears it. This is not a story about phones. This is a story about what happens to a biological reward system when it meets an environment it was never designed to survive. Your brain is rejecting reality, and it started long before you noticed. Number 5. The seeking machine. You are sitting in a waiting room, 5 minutes. That is all. No emergency. No task requiring your immediate attention. The room is quiet and the light is flat, and there is nothing particularly wrong with any of it. But within 40 seconds, your hand is already moving toward your pocket. You do not want anything specific. That is the part worth examining. You have no question that needs answering, no message you are expecting. You simply cannot tolerate the absence of incoming information. Here is what is actually happening. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. This is one of the most consequential misunderstandings in popular neuroscience. Dopamine is the seeking chemical. It is released not in the moment of reward, but in the anticipation of it, in the act of searching, reaching, pursuing. This was established definitively by neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz at the University of Cambridge, whose work on dopamine prediction error neurons, published across multiple papers in the journal Science, demonstrated that the dopamine system evolved to drive organisms toward potential rewards, not to celebrate their arrival. His findings earned him the Brain Prize in 2017. Finding the reward actually causes a dopamine drop, not a spike. What this means in a digital environment is precise and devastating. Every swipe is a lever pull on a slot machine that never fully pays out. The seeking loop activates. The reward disappoints. The seeking loop activates again. The system was designed for a world where novelty was rare and meaningful, not a sound in the brush, a change in the wind, a new water source. It was never designed for infinite scroll. The long-term cost is a brain locked into perpetual seeking, unable to settle, unable to arrive, experiencing every moment of genuine stillness as a malfunction rather than a state. You are not bored. You are a seeking machine that has been handed an endless lever, and you cannot put it down. Number 4. The gene that wanted the horizon. You are in a meeting. Someone is talking. The information is directly relevant to your life, and yet your attention has left the room entirely. It is somewhere outside a window, chasing something that is not there. You try to return. You manage 11 seconds, then it leaves again. This is not a modern failure of discipline. This may be written into your DNA. Here is what is actually happening. The DRD4-7R allele, a variant of the dopamine receptor D4 gene, is present in approximately 20% of the global population. Research published in Nature Genetics, including a landmark study by Epstein and colleagues confirmed by subsequent genome-wide analyses, found that the 7-repeat variant is directly associated with novelty-seeking behavior, higher impulsivity, and reduced sensitivity to routine dopamine stimulation. The carrier requires more input to register the same level of engagement. The variant is disproportionately concentrated in populations whose ancestors were long-distance migrants, people whose survival depended on leaving, on seeking the next valley, the next coastline, the next unexplored resource. For 200,000 years, DRD4-7R carriers were the ones who found the new continent. In a digital landscape engineered to monetize novelty at the highest possible frequency, they are among the most neurologically vulnerable to compulsive stimulation cycles. Research published in the Journal of Attention Disorders found that DRD4-7R carriers show significantly elevated rates of screen dependency behaviors and measurably lower baseline tolerance for unstimulating environments compared to non-carriers across multiple, independent population samples. The horizon that genes spent millennia chasing now fits inside a 4-inch screen. The gene does not know the horizon has collapsed. It keeps running. Number 3. The prefrontal cortex under siege. You are trying to read a real book, physical pages. The kind of sustained attention the activity requires used to feel natural, effortless even. Now it feels like holding a door shut against something pressing from the other side. You make it through a paragraph. Your mind releases, you catch it. Another paragraph. It releases again. After 4 pages, you feel inexplicably exhausted, as if you have run a short distance at the wrong speed. That exhaustion is real, and its source is structural. Here is what is actually happening. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for sustained attention, impulse inhibition, and long-range planning, is the most recently evolved structure in the human brain. It is also the slowest, and it loses direct competition with the limbic system, the older, faster, reward-driven architecture beneath it, almost every time the limbic system determines that something is urgent. Research from Stanford Medicine, including studies published in Nature Neuroscience, demonstrates that chronic exposure to high-frequency novelty signals measurably reduces gray matter density in prefrontal regions associated with attentional control. The brain physically reorganizes toward the faster, reactive system and away from the slower, deliberate one. A study published in Current Biology found that average sustained attention duration across population-level samples had declined measurably over the preceding decade, with the sharpest declines concentrated in younger cohorts who had experienced the longest exposure to high-frequency digital environments during critical windows of neural development. The prefrontal cortex built civilization. It wrote the books, composed the symphonies, and derived the equations. It operates on a different time scale from the scroll, slower, quieter, more expensive in cognitive energy. And in a sustained competition for neural resources, with a system that has been running escalating stimulation for years, it is losing ground that will take significant, deliberate effort to recover. You are not failing at reading. Your brain has been reorganized away from it. Number 2, the loops that never close. You are in the middle of something that matters, a task with real stakes. Then a notification arrives. You do not open it, but you know it is there, unread. And some part of your brain, a part you cannot reason with or argue out of position, has quietly detached from the task and is now orbiting the notification like an unresolved problem demanding a solution. This has a name, and it was described decades before the smartphone existed. Here is what is actually happening. The Zygarnik effect, first documented by Soviet psychologist Bluma Zygarnik in the 1920s, and extensively replicated in research published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, describes the brain's disproportionate fixation on incomplete tasks. Interrupted or unclosed cognitive loops remain active in working memory. They continue consuming neural resources and pulling attention back toward themselves even when the deliberate mind is actively redirecting elsewhere. In the ancestral environment, this was entirely adaptive. An abandoned hunt was worth remembering. An unfinished tool was worth tracking. Cognitive open loops drove completion and survival. In an environment that generates dozens of artificial open loops per hour, the unread message, the unanswered comment, the video paused at the midpoint, the email marked unread. The Zygarnik machinery runs without pause or resolution. Working memory saturates. genuine task engagement collapses beneath the weight of accumulated incompleteness. The feeling is not simple distraction. It is cognitive saturation presenting as restlessness. Research from the University of California, Irvine, found that following a single digital interruption, the average person required 23 minutes to fully return to the prior level of task engagement. The interruptions in a given workday are not measured in single digits. They are measured in dozens. Your brain is not scattered. It is full of loops it was instructed to close and never given the conditions to finish. Number 1. When real life stops being enough. This is the one that does not announce itself until it has already settled in. And by the time you notice it, it has been true for longer than is comfortable to acknowledge. You are at dinner. Real dinner with a person who matters to you. The food is good, the setting is warm. The conversation is the kind that should hold you entirely. There is nothing objectively wrong with any of it. And yet there is a flatness to the experience. A gray film between you and what is happening. The sensation is not unhappiness exactly. It is more like the volume of lived experience has been turned down without your permission. Things that should register fully don't quite land. A conversation that should be absorbing requires effort to stay inside. The present moment feels thin in a way you cannot explain to the person sitting across from you. You remember when things did not feel this way. You cannot identify precisely when the shift occurred. It was not a single event. It was a gradient. Here is what is actually happening. The dopamine system operates on a dynamic baseline, a calibrated set point against which all incoming stimulation is measured for significance. When that baseline is set in a low stimulation environment, ordinary experiences register as genuinely meaningful. A conversation, a walk, a piece of music, a meal, these generate sufficient dopamine response to feel real, present, worth inhabiting. When the baseline is chronically elevated by sustained high-frequency, high-intensity digital stimulation, those same experiences fall below the threshold of significance. They cannot generate enough signal to compete. They feel muted, insufficient, not quite real. This process, or the upward recalibration of the hedonic baseline, is documented with clinical precision by Anna Lembke at Stanford University's Department of Psychiatry, whose research, cited extensively in the Journal of Neuroscience and developed in her clinical text Dopamine Nation, draws direct mechanistic parallels between the neurological impact of substance dependence and the impact of chronic digital hyperstimulation. The brain responds to both by down-regulating dopamine receptor sensitivity. The world must work exponentially harder to reach you, and eventually, the unengineered world, the world that does not employ a behavioral science team, simply cannot work hard enough. This is not clinical depression. It is something quieter, and in some ways more difficult to address because it carries no clear name and generates no acute crisis. Research published in the American Journal of Psychiatry identifies hedonic recalibration as a significant mediating factor in the rising incidence of persistent, low-grade dissatisfaction among adults in high-connectivity environments. A background flatness that feels like a personality trait but is, in fact, a neurological adjustment. Sit with what that means. Every piece of content you have consumed in the last decade was produced by engineers and behavioral scientists whose professional purpose was to be more stimulating than whatever came before it. You have been inside an escalating arms race between your ancient biology and an industry with unlimited resources, using your own dopamine baseline as a scoreboard. Real life was never entered into that competition. A sunset was not engineered. A human conversation has no retention algorithm. A book does not A/B test its opening sentence against your amygdala response. These things are real precisely because they make no effort to hold you, and quietly, without a single moment you could point to, your nervous system began to find them insufficient. The question that follows is not whether to disconnect entirely. It is simpler and harder than that. It is whether you are willing to sit with the discomfort of a recalibrating brain, the boredom, the restlessness, the gray, long enough to let the baseline fall back to a level where an ordinary moment can reach you again. The flatness is not reality. It is your current threshold. And thresholds can move. If this names something you have been feeling, subscribe. There is more.